the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Thank goodness for the FDA, the careful government scientists. They make sure that greedy drug companies don't sell us dangerous drugs or drugs that don't work. One drug company said the drug thalidomide would cure morning sickness in pregnant women. And it usually did. But then some women who took thalidomide gave birth to children with no arms or legs. This happened in Europe, but not in America, because the FDA hadn't yet approved thalidomide. So thank goodness for the FDA protecting us. But then, like all government agencies, the FDA grew like a tumor. Today, they're a bureaucratic obstacle to innovation. Getting a new drug approved now costs more than $1 billion and takes up to 15 years. That caution kills people, too. The FDA once held a news conference and proudly announced this new heart drug we're approving will save 14,000 American lives a year. No one stood up at the press conference to ask, excuse me, didn't this also mean you killed 14,000 people last year by delaying its approval? No reporter asked that because reporters don't think that way. But it absolutely meant that. If the drug could save 14,000 people but wasn't approved, then that year 14,000 Americans died because of that delay. Regulation can kill, too. But former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, who served on a committee that oversaw the FDA, says this regulation is good and there should be more of it. Dennis?
I'm not making such a broad statement. You know, we have to be careful about this, John, to make sure that people are not going to be at risk from taking drugs that may have side effects or adverse consequences that haven't properly been reported before they were put on the market.
But even stuff that is reported and goes through the FDA causes bad effects. Do you disagree that the delay kills people, too?
Well, delays can create problems, there's no question about it. As a matter of fact, because of exactly what you said, in recent years, the Food and Drug Administration has changed the way it does business by putting new programs forward for accelerated approval of new drugs, for a fast-track process for bringing a new drug to market.
Faster track, but it's still slow. Why isn't it my body, my choice? And if I'm dying, why can't I take anything?
Well, I agree with you essentially, John, because the fact of the matter is the government in the end can't give us health, and we have to be responsible for our own lives.
You agree with me? We don't need the FDA should be voluntary. It should be our choice?
No, the regulation necessary. But what I'm saying, though, that each of us has the power to make choices governing our own health. We accept the consequences. The FDA provides information as a result of its regulatory process.
No, the FDA tells companies you may not sell this, tells people you may not take this. They can't get the drug.
The FDA can't tell people don't take this, but they can stop a drug from getting to the market in the event that the drug is shown to have adverse consequences in clinical trials. I mean, this is a fact, and we don't want anybody to get hurt, but we know people do get hurt.
But if they can't bring it to market, people can't take it.
Well, sometimes that's good. For example, some drugs are brought to market and people get hurt.
You just watched the movie The Dallas Buyers Club, right? That got an Oscar nomination.
And it makes the point that you're talking about.
For those of you who did not see the movie, the star, Matthew McConaughey, is told he has AIDS. He'll be dead in 30 days. So he wants to try drugs like AZT, which he heard might cure him. But his doctors say, no, you may not.
None of those drugs have been approved by the FDA.
Screw the FDA. I'm going to be DOA. I say what goes in my body, not you.
That decision, like it or not, is left up to the people in this hospital.
It's his body. Why should the government stand in the way?
Well, there are cases in which individual benefit can be obtained by a drug that's not approved by the FDA. That's true. Then it's up to the person to make his or her own decision about whether they want to gain access to it, and that does happen. Sometimes
but you have to go to Mexico or Europe? You can't get it in America.
Sometimes people have to go out of the country to get things, unfortunately, that the FDA may not have approved, but in not approving it, there often are reasons that deal with serious adverse health consequences for people taking a drug that hasn't gone through an approval process.
Well, thank you, Congressman Kucinich. I think it should be our choice. Let's hear from the other side. Jen McNary has two sons, 15-year-old Austin and 12-year-old Max. Both have a form of muscular dystrophy that leads to muscle degeneration and eventually death. The boys' mom heard about an experimental drug that might cure the kids. She tried to get them into the FDA-approved trial that was testing the drugs and was told Max could be in the study, but Austin could not. After just 16 weeks, Jen could see the drug was working. Max can walk. He can dance. He can swim. But Austin continues to get worse. Jen McNary joins us now, along with Darcy Olson of the Goldwater Institute, which is a think tank that argues that people who are dying should have the right to try any drug, even if it's not government approved. You heard the congressman? It's to protect you.
John, this is about saving lives. And what the Goldwater Institute is working on is an initiative where the states can give anyone with a terminal illness the right to try an experimental drug before the FDA has approved it. So, usually a manufacturer discovers a drug and it takes 10 to 15 years before it can get into, say, Jen's hands for her sons. We're saying once they have an awareness of that drug, access should be immediate.
If she wants it, should be able to get it. And this Right to Try Act has passed parts of legislatures in several states, but it didn't just breeze through as I would think it would. If you're dying, you ought to be able to try something.
Well, it's actually moving pretty quickly in multiple states across the country. It polls at 85%, and this is true on the left, on the right, men, women. This is a no-brainer for people, John. Everyone has someone in their family or has a close friend who has suffered and died from something like cancer or other terminal illnesses. People know that when their mortality hangs in the balance, they ought to have the right to try these potentially life-saving drugs, no question.
Now, you heard about this new drug and no idea if it would work, and then you heard about the study and went to the doctors and they said your older son was too old, or what happened?
So the study was started with 12 boys in the United States, and Max qualified because he was still ambulatory. Austin was already non-ambulatory.
And of the 12 kids in the test, 10 have shown marked improvement.
So actually, all of the boys at this point are stable. The two that did go non-ambulatory have better lung function. So that's the new data that just came out. And all of the kids...
And stable is a good thing because this has been 2.5 years and this disease causes deterioration.
So one thing that is certain about Duchenne is kids don't get better, they don't stay stable, they always get worse. And these children were chosen because they were all about to fall off a cliff. They were all about to stop walking.
And they stopped falling off the cliff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They all stopped. They all stabilized.
And the improvement in your younger son is miraculous. And
it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He was supposed to be in a wheelchair. He's 12 and a half. He is now helping to take care of his older brother who is dying, who is getting worse, watching his brother get better.
How do they deal with it? Is he angry?
Austin's 15 now. 15-year-olds in general are angry. 15-year-olds who are being betrayed by their government are even angrier. And he knows the drug works. He's seen it firsthand. He sees it every day, and he wants access.
So, Darcy, how do you reconcile what Congressman Kucinich says with her experience? What are they thinking?
What the FDA is doing here is an abomination. There was a new drug, you talk about fast track, that just came out called Gazyva for leukemia patients. When the FDA discovered it, they thought, this is a miracle drug. They said, we're going to fast track this so people can get it right away. That fast track took 7 years. So from the time the trial started to the time it was actually able to get into patients' hands, 30,000 people died.
There's an attitude in government that's just, we are the bullies. We have to decide for you.
I'm not even sure sometimes that they think about this, and Jen could tell you about this. She's met face-to-face with the commissioner, and they're like, oh, we're working on your problem, and you think, are you a mother? Have you had anyone sick in your family? It's like boxing with tar,
right? They don't argue.
They don't appear to see that every day that goes by is a loss of function for these boys, and kids are dying while they're waiting. I can't count the number of boys we've lost, and since the beginning of the trial, Austin is now losing the ability to use his arms. 2.5 years of a fully, completely safe and effective drug that met all its endpoints. There isn't a single side effect. So talk about, the FDA protecting you. There is nothing to protect you from with this drug. There is no off-target effect, not a single one.
Occasionally, the doctors will argue, well, we need it to be sure if it works, a clear double-blind study. And if you can go off and take the drug, we won't be sure.
Well, I mean, even double-blind studies are arguably immoral at this point. When you're talking about patients with a terminal illness, we know what will happen if they get a placebo. They will die. This is a very antiquated and immoral way of trying to test for efficacy in drugs, and it needs to stop.
I would think the baseline assumption should be that we own our bodies. We should get to decide for ourselves. Government says, no, you may not. Why do Americans go along with that?
Well, I'm not sure that they do, John. I think this issue is like the American debt. 75% of the people say they want it solved, and Congress doesn't do anything year after year. I mean, the political system has a lot of problems, and I don't think what politicians do necessarily reflects what the people want.